Explosions lit up Israel's night sky as interceptors took down dozens upon dozens of Iranian-launched drones. Israel's military spokesman said the nation's defense systems detected incoming drones, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles launched from Iran and its proxies.
Together with our allies and partners across the region, we are operating at this very moment to defend Israel from Iran's attack. So far, we have intercepted the vast majority of incoming missiles by Israeli systems.
But did they really intercept all those missiles from with Israeli systems? That was from Daniel Hagari, the Israeli spokesman, the day after Iran attacked on the 13th of April this past month. And there's been a lot of debate about how effective that system was. And we had MIT professor Ted Postol on last week, I think it was, talking about some of this stuff. And we've asked him to come back on today because we want to get it more in depth of what the Iron Dome system and the whole air defense system of Israel actually is supposed to do and what it actually does do. So, Professor, welcome back to the show today. Really glad to have you.
It's a great pleasure to be here.
Boy, I don't know if you were able to see some of the comments we had from the show last time, but a lot of people were really loving what you have because you provide information that just doesn't show up on mainstream media. Nobody even wants to talk about it. And we're actually going to show some of what the mainstream media is saying and why shows like this are necessary so that people can find out what the truth is because of some of your expertise here. And we're really grateful to get into this.
Thank you. Thank you.
And so let me just jump onto the first one here. So this one is actually from 2023. This first one shot I'm going to show you here, where they're looking at some of the economics of this system, how much it costs, where the money comes from to build them, and then how effective it is. Check this out.
The Iron Dome system is a drop in the bucket. It's not going to be something that is impactful to maintain, but what it is highly effective, I think up to 92% effective at catching genuine threats that are fired out.
And he explained right before that clip started how most of these are made in the United States, and we provide most of this stuff, so it's really good for the military-industrial complex for us. But of course, he's saying how effective it was. Also, another video here.
Well, he's an expert, right? He was told the number, and he repeats it.
Yes,
and he doesn't do any work. This is a problem I have with the journalism community.
And he was pitched on the show as the tech guy, the tech expert guy. So he's supposed to be one that knows it, but I'm pretty confident, as you said, that he was just told what the numbers were and then just repeated it.
Right.
But
right.
We're going to see that goes on. So here's another one.
I wonder how much he was paid.
Yeah,
okay.
Apparently enough, because it seems to be effective in that marketing, as we're going to talk about that a little bit more too, as opposed to reality. But here's another one, and I think this one was from also shortly after the Iranian attack, where a lot of people were interested in their Iron Dome, and there's one video that shows how the whole system is supposed to work together.
Experts say it's a layered approach that prevents an air assault. The upper layers, called aerosystems, can stop missiles outside Earth's atmosphere. The next layer, called David's Sling, is designed to intercept mid-range missiles like the ones fired over the weekend. Finally, Israel's well-known Iron Dome can take out short-range rockets. Breitman worked at the Pentagon as Israel developed this missile defense program in the early 2000s.
It's a real boost not only to Israel's security, but to the U.S. defense industrial base, since there's a very, very strong U.S. company presence in those systems.
Israeli defense forces say only 5 missiles made it through. Israeli and U.S. aircraft stationed nearby intercepted nearly all of the 170 drones and dozens of missiles before they ever entered Israeli territory.
Now, I know you're going to have something to say about that claim there, that last one that they shot down all of these things here. But I want to show you one last video before we get into your analysis of what actually happened. This is that one kind of looked at the whole system. This one here is going to look at the Iron Dome itself.
Israel's biggest success has been its Iron Dome program. There are 10 Iron Dome batteries in Israel. Each battery has up to 4 launchers with 20 Tamir missiles in each launcher. They can detect and neutralize small incoming projectiles like rockets, artillery shells, and short-range missiles. The Iron Dome can shoot down incoming threats up to 70 kilometers away, and the batteries can be moved around, making them extremely versatile. To protect from long-range targets and larger incoming projectiles, Israel has another multi-layered defense. It's called the David's Sling, which protects against short and medium-range threats. David's Sling comprises of Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 missile systems which protect Israel from ballistic and cruise missiles. David's Sling can even neutralize threats in the upper atmosphere. And then there's the third layer of defense, which is the Israeli Air Force. Israel used its fighter jets, including the state-of-the-art F-35 stealth fighter, to destroy the incoming Iranian drones.
So that's how it's supposed to work. Tell us how it actually is working.
Well, I think we should, let me just step back for a second and say this is a scam. It's a scam on the Israeli people, and it's a scam on the American taxpayer. This missile system, Iron Dome, I will focus on Iron Dome only at this time. Iron Dome interceptors have a very low intercept rate. I would put it at less than 3 or 4% of the time. Oh, wow. They might actually hit something. And when I say they might actually hit something, I'm talking about artillery rockets, not these long-range ballistic missiles, which are much harder to hit. And I'll talk a little bit about the data we have on artillery rockets. Now, an important difference, a very important difference between the artillery rocket and the long-range ballistic missiles is that the artillery rockets travel very slowly relative to the ballistic missiles. The ballistic missiles come in, their speeds they travel about 3.5 kilometers per second.
Wow.
The long-range ballistic, the artillery rockets travel at maybe 200 to 300 meters per second, 0.2 or 0.3 kilometers per second. And the longest range, which I'll show you data from, travel at 0.7 or 0.8 kilometers per second. These would be the missiles that are launched from Gaza into Tel Aviv. And we have some very good data from Tel Aviv that shows that the system is basically non-functioning, to first approximation.
That's really shocking. Because I didn't expect your number to be that low. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's very low. And the cost of these things, I haven't been able to, I'm not a journalist. If you had a good journalist involved, they should be able to determine the cost of it, because the Israelis seem to be claiming $50,000 per interceptor. Now, the Iron Dome interceptor is basically an air-to-air missile, which has been modified so it can be launched from the ground. So it's got more propulsion to offset the fact that it's not launched from an airplane. Now, a Sidewinder, typical Sidewinder air-to-air missile costs the taxpayer about $500,000, $500,000. Wow. So Raytheon is producing the Iron Dome interceptor, and I don't understand why it doesn't cost $200,000 to $500,000 rather than $50,000 like the Israelis have been claiming. And you would think that some enterprising journalist whose job it is to understand whether or not the public is being told the truth would look into this matter, because it's all public money. So there is a trail somewhere that would tell you what the actual cost of the system is. The procedure that is currently that has been adopted for acquiring Iron Dome is that the Israelis designed it and developed it, of course funded by the United States, and then the manufacturing was handed over to Raytheon. So the way it works is, let's say the interceptor costs $500,000. So what we do is we put on the account book that we've given Israel $500,000, but in fact, we just transfer $500,000 to Raytheon, who then provides the missile, manufactures the missile in the United States, and then provides the missile to the Israelis. So the money never leaves the country in this particular case, and
That's like the case with about 80% of the Ukraine aid, but I digress. So please continue.
No, it's a lot of this aid. Now, if the weapon system works and it meets its strategic goals, okay, and that's a decision that the taxpayer, in effect, makes. Although the Congress and the should be watching how the taxpayer money gets used. And of course, the argument is, and it's true, that it produces jobs. In my state, Massachusetts, I'm in California at the moment, but my main residency is in Massachusetts. Raytheon was the biggest employer in the state, at least for a long time. It's a very big employer. So it's critical to the economic well-being of the state that all this money is pouring in to Raytheon. But is it really good for the country overall? Because you build weapons because you need them. I mean, I'm not against building weapons. I understand that there's a dangerous world out there, and we do need to use weapons. I'm not so happy about whether we make good decisions about using weapons, but that's a different discussion. There's no question we need weapons for all kinds of situations. But you build a weapon knowing that it contributes in a small way to your economy. So, for example, if you pay people to build Iron Dome interceptors, you're putting money into the economy by giving them a salary, but the goods that they produce do not contribute further to the economy. If they were building trucks, those trucks would produce things for the society. So you build weapons because you need them for your security, and you accept that they are an inefficient, in fact, wasteful way to boost your economy. And I'm not opposed. Again, I'm not opposed to building the weapons, but we build these weapons. We give them. Because we're paying everything basically with Iron Dome. We give them to the Israelis. They don't work, as I'll demonstrate. But the Israelis lie to their own people, and our own government turns a blind eye to this, because the data I will show you is taken from public information. I can assure you that the Israelis have tremendously more detailed data, and I can describe the kind of data they have. So nobody in the United States, to my knowledge, has asked for that data. We're funding the system.
Yeah, at least
we're paying billions of dollars for it.
So let me ask you this. So obviously this last round here on the 13th of April, allegedly up to 350 total projectiles were launched, drones and missiles, etc. And we only saw a few hits on an airfield in Israel. And then all the rest of them, we have this footage from jets and stuff that got shot down. Is it the case that the vast majority of those were shot down by the jets? Or I know you mentioned on our last show, a lot of the missiles themselves just fell apart as they were coming down. And so they weren't intercepted, but they didn't hit anything because they malfunctioned or so. So did the main reason why that there wasn't a lot of hits on Israel because they were shot down by aircraft? Is that accurate?
Well, yeah, there were two kinds of, broadly speaking, there were two kinds of attacking vehicles. There were drones and cruise missiles, which fly like airplanes. And they can be detected by an airborne warning and control aircraft, one of these aircraft that have big radar capabilities on them. Those aircraft can work with fighters. The aircraft find, they survey the whole sky around them. They can see the drones and cruise missiles and track them, and they can communicate directly to the fighter aircraft, which then fly to an appropriate location where they can see the aircraft with their own radars and infrared systems. They can acquire the targets on their own, they're closer in, and shoot them down. And that worked very well.
Didn't you say that those sidewinders that we used to shoot down those $20,000-$30,000 drones were like the $500,000 variety? $500,000?
Yeah, that's what they're listed as costing, $500,000 each. So
it's not a good trade-off for us, but I don't know how long we can keep that up. But anyways, I don't want to just
no, that's an important point, but we can discuss that at some future time, the cost of these things. But then there's a second kind of delivery vehicle, and that's what's called a ballistic missile. This is a missile that can that flies under the influence of gravity and air drag in the case of a short range missile, and aerodynamics. Gary, can you put up slide 6? Is that possible? There it is. Okay, you see, here's an example of what's called the trajectory of a GRAD rocket-propelled artillery rocket. It's very short range. Notice that the full range of the rocket is 20 kilometers. Good enough for annoying the Israelis. I'll show you in a second. The ranges in Israel, and in the case of the GRAD, it carries, I don't know, a 20, 30-pound warhead. I'd have to look it up exactly. And you launch it. The rocket motor is on for 2 seconds or so, only a short time. And then it coasts under the influence of gravity and aerodynamic drag. Could you go to slide number 5? This is just what is happening to the rocket. It shows you an image of the rocket. And if you look at the dark green front end, that part of the front end, that's the warhead. And the warhead has explosive materials inside a metal casing. The metal casing serves to create fragments that are accelerated by the exploding internal munitions. And those fragments can kill and injure at much greater range than the explosive blast wave. So one way to think of these warheads is like a shotgun that produces fragments in all directions. In fact, the directions of most of the fragments, the great majority of fragments, is roughly perpendicular to the axis of symmetry. That's because you have a cylinder of explosives. The cylinder is mostly going laterally, and it pushes all these fragments out laterally. So it's a very dense fragmentation pattern, perpendicular to the axis of the explosive device, and that's how these things do damage. Now, on slide 4, we can see the ranges that are relevant for reaching different places in Gaza. And so, for example, if you want to reach Ashdod, that's at roughly 40 kilometers from locations roughly inside Gaza. And so you would need a certain kind of rocket to reach that range. So if we go to slide 3, we'll see that the rocket that is second from the right is a Fajr 3. That's an Iranian-designed ballistic missile. It has a range of about 45 kilometers, and it carries a warhead of about 100 pounds. So it's, you wouldn't ignore the consequences of a 100-pound warhead, but if it hit your home and it went through the roof, which it could do, and then exploded. If you were in a safe room, which is required by law in Israel, every house has to have a safe room built to certain physical standards. Unless you were very unlucky and it literally went through the roof and hit the safe room itself, you would be okay. You wouldn't be happy, of course, because there'd be a lot of damage to your house. But if you had been in the room where this thing came through the roof, it would kill you, no question. If you were in the room adjacent to it, you might well survive the attack.
And that, you said that's with the Fajr 3.
That's a Fajr 3. Now,
Okay.
the kinds of missiles that we'll look at when I show you some data from Tel Aviv is the Fajr 5, which is the missile on the most right side. That's a bigger missile, obviously. It carries a 200-pound warhead, so that's a lot. It can do significant damage if it comes through your house and explodes. Of course, a very high percentage of these missiles land in open space because they're not guided. And let me just, if we move to slide 7, we can see what the actual accuracy at 40 kilometers of the Fajr 3 is. So if you look at the cross in the middle, that would be the aim point you're intending to hit. The first spheroid elongated circle is the where 50% of the time one of your rockets would land relative to that aim point. And the second line is where 95% of your rockets would land.
Yikes.
So you can see.
Inaccurate?
What?
They're that inaccurate?
Well, the reasons for the inaccuracy are you can do better. If you're a military organization, you can do better because what you do is you measure, first of all, your rockets are more precisely manufactured. You can control the angle of launch much more accurately than you can if you're just setting this thing up in the basement and firing it out of the basement like people in Gaza would be doing.
Yeah.
The wind along the trajectory will affect your accuracy, and you don't know those details, although a military unit would.
Right, would have
and so you can do much better if you're fighting a war. So if you're Russians launching rockets at Ukrainians, you do much better. But they're still not extremely accurate. They're accurate enough to, if you're launching them from a multiple rocket launcher, you launch tens of them at a time, maybe more, and you cover an open area with these explosions that are spraying fragments all over, and you do it essentially all at once. So rockets have a utility different from that of artillery. Rockets can arrive in a very short interval of time because you can launch them very quickly, while artillery shells take time to load and launch. You can, of course, make a very intense artillery barrage if you have lots of guns firing. And that's, of course, the situation in Ukraine. So the differences may be academic, so to speak.
Maybe you're going to get this in just a second, but am I starting to understand here that part of the reason why the Iron Dome works so well, or the whole air defense system, is because most of these missiles, especially, I guess you'll be different if it's the drones, but most of the missiles weren't going to hit their actual target anyway and could land.
They're going to hit open spaces. So why don't we go to slide 49? That's way back. Gary?
Yeah, he's coming up with it.
It's all right. I know Gary's been drinking, so. Oh, that's not. Oh, gee, I got the wrong one.
Hey, wait a second there.
Oh, that's That's
Oh boy.
yeah. I seem to have. I seem to have the wrong numbered slides. Why is it? All right. Well, that's the wrong slide from what I thought I was getting to, but we'll go to a slide later on. Can you go to slide 50 and see what we get there? No, I must have sent you a file that I hadn't cleaned out, so I guess I can't pick the number for this one.
Show that slide up that you got there. Maybe we can just go to it.
Well,
what it looks
this
like.
is an example of trajectories that you can see during the day. So you can see that one of the three Iron Dome interceptors did a loop-de-loop, something it should never do. And so this was, I was going to show this later, but basically, why don't we go back to slide 8 and I'll describe how Iron Dome works, and then we can go into these other slides. All right, so let me just describe the Iron Dome intercept. It's very important that you understand how the system is supposed to work, because there's lots of indicators that the system is not working. You saw a couple of examples earlier, but if you know how the system is supposed to work, you can on your own look at photographs and videos and see that the system is not working. So you don't need me to do this. I'm just showing you what to look for. So if we go to the next slide, we're going to see one of the advertising points of Iron Dome. Looks like I sent you the wrong version of my, so we'll just have to go with it as we can. That's my fault. So in this slide, it's just basically, there's a very thin region. It's hard to see, unfortunately, in the improved slides I sent earlier. It was, again, this is my fault. There's a region. What happens is with Iron Dome, you're basically choosing an area to defend. Anything that's going to fall outside that area, okay, all right, stop there. Anything that falls outside that area, you're not going to try to intercept. So, so what you do is you put a radar. The lower left corner shows you the location of a radar. Immediately above it, in a circle, there's a circle on the left side. That is a command center. The command center is basically there to command the whole system. It decides what, it's got computers, it's got operators in it. The radar is separated from the command center, because if you're dealing with an adversary who can fight back, in this case, we're not dealing with one who can do that. But if you're in Ukraine and you're dealing with the Russians, they'll find that radar and they'll attack it. And you don't want to get the crew that's manning the system also killed, because they're hard to replace. Immediately between the radar and the command center, you'll see another little image of something. It's hard to see. That's just a power station so that the system can operate. And then the three units to the right are what are called launch stations. A launch station is simply a set of canisters which contain Iron Dome interceptors. And the Iron Dome interceptors, when they're launched, simply fly out of the canister. So they're sitting in the canister. The rocket motor ignites. The Iron Dome interceptor simply flies through a diaphragm at the front end of the interceptor. It's a very thin diaphragm, and goes about its business on a trajectory. In the next slide, Let's go two more. Let's go one more, please. Okay. Now, in the next slide, in this slide, I'm sorry, we see a missile rising over the horizon. And notice that this not very clear. Unfortunately, I did some work on the. I have a wrong briefing here. You can see this faint yellow region, which shows you the radar search beam. This is so. What the radar does is it looks at a particular location. Let's say in the upper right. It steps to another location next to the left. It steps again, and it scans the sky, returning back to the location it started at every few seconds. So it's got a scan of scanning the sky. When it happens to look in an angle where the rocket is going, it detects the rocket. But it then starts continuing to watch the rocket. So in the earlier slide, you saw the rocket was close to the horizon. And then in the next two slides, you see the rocket is moving up. So the radar is tracking the rocket. Now, in this particular slide, let's hold this slide for the moment, we see that there's a rocket trajectory. The rocket trajectory there is a line. The rocket has not gone anywhere yet, but we have a good knowledge of the rocket and its behavior. So we can estimate where this rocket is going. In this particular case, we know the rocket is going to land inside the zone we want to defend. It's not going to be very accurate. So when it lands inside the zone we want to defend, it could land in an open area, fields, backyards, streets, or it can hit a home or a building. So we don't know. So the fact that there's little building damage is going to be relatively low, even if there is no intercepts.
Yeah.
Rocket warheads are relatively small. Again, they will kill you if you're near a rocket. But if you get on the ground and it doesn't land on top of you or very near you, you won't be killed.
And
so
Ed, what's the burst radius of a Fodger 3, say, for example? Like if it hit it outside and you're outside, what's the radius that you have?
If you were standing up and took no shelter, you could be killed at 40 or 50 or 60 feet by a fragment. If you lie down, you could survive 10 feet because the fragments are going to be going over your head. So, and they're only going to be going in certain directions because, as I mentioned to you, the warhead produces a pancake of fragments. So if the missile comes in at a right angle and you happen to be perpendicular to the missile at a range of 40 feet, it'll hit you with a fragment and kill you. But if you're on the ground...
Let me ask you. So, like a standard 155 millimeter artillery shell, they always say, or we always used to teach anyway, that it had a kill radius of about 50 meters or so.
Yes. It could easily kill you at 150 feet. Yeah, sure.
This sounds like a lot less than a 155 shell.
Well, a 155 shell has a casing that is a masterpiece of metallurgy that is designed to fragment into fragments of tens of grams in size at a very even rate because of the way the metal has been treated before it is molded into a casing. And if you can control those fragments through the metallurgy so that their physical size and shape are so that they don't have a very high air drag and they're relatively uniform in size, You can get a large number of fragments, and those fragments can be lethal at very long ranges. The density of fragments, though, drops very dramatically. So it's certainly true that you can be killed at 150 feet by a fragment, but the question is, what is the fragment density?
Right. But it
And
sounds like the fragment density is less for a Fajr 3 missile than even for a 155 shell. Do I understand that correctly?
it to be honest, it may or may not be. So you have a good question. Your answer, it depends on how if the shell, if the warhead is manufactured in Gaza. In other words, because the rocket comes in sections. If the warhead is manufactured in Gaza, the fragment density will be much lower.
Yeah.
Because the casing will fragment into large and small pieces, and the overall number of fragments and the density of fragments at a given range will be much lower. This is always true. If you look at terrorist bombs that are just manufactured in a non-industrialized environment, the fragmentation of these bombs is very non-uniform because the casings are made out of pipes and things like that, and so they are lethal. They certainly will kill you.
Yeah.
But they will be. You're less likely. The density of fragments will be much lower, and the speeds will be lower, but they'll still be high enough to kill you if they hit you. So
yeah, well, I think that's just really fascinating because the significance of that is that, I mean, you think of a rocket and you think, this massive explosion as opposed to just a common artillery shell, but in terms of lethality, sometimes those artillery shells could be even more, which means that these rockets are not as big of a threat as maybe what a lot of people think.
Well, they're comparable to an artillery shell, I would say, and maybe, depending on the rocket, may be comparable, but are very likely to be less.
I see. I don't want to distract you. I'm sorry.
No. This is good. It's good. Your audience.
Yeah. But let's get back, because I want to really drill in on the point about how these things are not effective. And I know you've got some things that show how some of these missiles activated after the artillery rocket went past.
Right. So notice is a very important thing to notice here. Okay, so I want that the line that shows the interceptor's path is designed to place the interceptor in front of the incoming rocket. In other words, you want to engage the incoming enemy rocket from the front. And that's what the interceptor in this Israeli slide, I might add, is trying to do. It's going to go into the front of the interceptor of the artillery rocket trajectory. Now, if you try to intercept side on, you have a terribly unfavorable situation, and to a very good first approximation, you will essentially never hit the target. And this is straightforward to understand if I use my fingers, which are an important device for me in education. If I have a rocket coming in and I'm trying to intercept it, it's coming down, and let's imagine I want to be at the location of my horizontal finger in order to hit the rocket's front end. I must hit the rocket's front end, because if I hit the rocket in the middle, I can destroy the rocket motor casing, but there's no propellant in it. It's already used all its fuel, and the rocket casing will go onto the ground and explode. And remember, I'm shooting into an area I already have no special accuracy. So the fact that I divert the rocket a little when I destroy its casing is irrelevant, because the rocket may have been on a trajectory to fall into an empty field, and when I hit it, the warhead is not destroyed, and it may actually fall on a building. So the only way to reliably intercept is to destroy the warhead. Now, this rocket is traveling at 800 meters per second in the case of Tel Aviv. So if I arrive at this point 1/100th of a second later than I intended to, the rocket will be here. So I not only have to be at the right location, but I have to be at that location within 1/100th of a second or higher precision to hit the front end. Now, there's a real problem with hitting the front end because I probably cannot see the front end. Remember, the front end is a cone-shaped part of the rocket, and one of the biggest problems you have with sensor systems, the radar on the interceptor, the infrared homing, is to find the front end of the missile. So not only do I have to arrive at exactly the right time, but I also have to know where the front end is, and I probably don't. So the side-on attack is too demanding relative to the technology that's available to me. So what I instead do is I come in front on. Now, when I come in front on, it doesn't matter whether I arrive at the intercept, the desired intercept point earlier or later.
Yeah.
Because as long as I'm on the track of the incoming rocket, I'm going to hit the front end, and I'm going to destroy the warhead.
Yeah.
Now, it turns out that it's almost never so accurate that the Iron Dome will physically hit the front end. I'll show you an example of that.
Okay.
It's very hard to find. I have to go through dozens and dozens of videos. Now, the way the Iron Dome is supposed to operate, in addition to hitting the front end, it's supposed to operate by if it misses the front end, it has a warhead in it, and the warhead has fragments. I'll show you the warhead, how the warhead works, and it accelerates. It's a cylindrical warhead, and it accelerates a pattern of fragments perpendicular. But if I must detonate the warhead exactly at the right time so the fragments hit the warhead. It turns out that since I can't see the front end very accurately, I can't fuse the warhead very well. It also turns out that because the Iron Dome does not have a large radius, it cannot accelerate the fragments to a high enough speed to penetrate the outer casing of the explosive warhead and cause it to detonate. So the fact that the Iron Dome has an explosive warhead on it is irrelevant to destroying the rocket. Now, if the Iron Dome is trying to hit a drone, anywhere on the drone these fragments hit, it's going to destroy the drone. So I can have a very, very high intercept rate against drones. So if they were using this to shoot down drones, I don't know they were, but it would have a very high intercept rate. If you shot it at an airplane, it would also have a very high intercept rate. But against the missile target is different. You must hit the front end, and it's a very small target, and it's very difficult to see it.
And obviously, the faster the enemy rocket, the less the chances are of hitting it, right?
Right. So this rocket is coming in at 0.8 kilometers per second. The rockets coming in during the April 13-14 attack were coming in at 3.5 kilometers per second. And you must be able to see the incoming rocket ahead of you at a long enough distance that you can make the adjustments to hit it. So the fact that the speed is so much higher means you have to see it at a much longer distance ahead of you, and you don't have the power to do that. So the very fast rocket, the interceptor cannot see it early enough to make the adjustments because it takes time to make adjustments. So it just flies right by it.
Yeah. Now, I believe, Professor, I think, Gary, you showed some of these clips on the B-roll toward the first of the session, which I think shows exactly what he's talking about there. Is that something we can roll up there, Gary? If you know what I'm talking about. Okay. Yeah, he said he's working and he'll get there in just a minute.
Okay.
But I wanted to.
Biggest
No, not
success
that
has
one.
been its Iron Dome
The
program.
one you had is B-roll because it showed the rockets coming in and. Yeah, no, not this video. Gary.
Yeah, there's an infrared clip that shows that shows a test that was taken with high-speed infrared cameras. And in those videos, and you can find them, your audience can go on the web and find these. And you'll see that always in the tests that they show you, the incoming target rocket, which of course is a test rocket for them to experiment with, is always hit from the front end by the Iron Dome interceptor. So that's what you see. In this case,
what we're seeing here, I think these are the ones you said some of the casings are falling apart, but you pointed out, I think last time,
there's nothing to do with Iron Dome. This has to do with the rockets breaking up, and
they're not even attempting to intercept. It doesn't appear.
No, there is no attempts. You see these dots moving forward below. Those are probably warheads that broke off the rocket, and they're falling randomly, and they will fall short of the intended target because their drag on them is higher relative to their weight. So, but those warheads will fall, but they'll fall in the open desert because these rockets were fired at the airfields in the Negev. But in a city, these warheads would land somewhere and explode.
Yeah,
that's what happened in the Gulf War of 1991. The Iraqis, in this case, rather than the Iranians, were attacking Tel Aviv and other places, and the warheads were breaking off the missiles. Then it was a different missile they were using, but it was the same phenomenon, and the warheads just went to the ground and exploded. So the whole rockets didn't.
Professor, we're running a little short on time, so I don't want to miss a few things here. But what is the bottom line for? Because you said you have data that shows that only, I guess, 3% of these were actually knocked out.
Well, why don't we let's hope the numbering is. Why don't we jump to slide 20? Let's see where we go. I don't. Oh, we're just go, Gary. Just go ahead, and I'll tell you to stop. Just. All right, that's it. Stop there. Here you see a night photograph. This is actually taken with a video camera. So this is one frame from a video camera. It was posted as a photograph, though. And you see this extremely bright ball of light in the air. That is a successful intercept by an Iron Dome interceptor. This particular interceptor, in a very, very improbable event, physically hit the front end of this rocket. In other words, it physically hit it. If it went, otherwise, it would just fly by it and miss it. The warhead would. If we saw the warhead on the Iron Dome explode, we would see a much smaller fireball. The explosive material in the artillery rocket is about 10 times more explosive material than the explosive warhead in the Iron Dome interceptor. So when we see an Iron Dome interceptor, we'll see a fireball that'll be roughly 3 times smaller in diameter than what we're seeing here. So we can tell what an explosion of an Iron Dome interceptor is. And if you just see an explosion of an Iron Dome, we'll see one shortly. You'll see that the fireball is much smaller, and it's just because there's less explosives in it. You see next the box to the lower right on the of the fireball, and then expanded to its right is a magnified image of that region in the box. If you look in the magnified region, you can see there are 2 artillery rockets that were not engaged. The other thing to notice is that you see all these slightly elongated dots in the air. Those slightly elongated dots are the plume of Iron Dome interceptors. So you can see the Iron Dome interceptors flying into the air. You don't see any bright fireballs anywhere, though. Notice also that there are. Let's look at the magnified box. You can see there are contrails, very dimly lit contrails that you can see behind in the background. Those contrails are the smoke contrails from other Iron Dome interceptors that are not in the field of view. So you can see there's oogles of Iron Dome interceptors in the air, and only one intercept. So this should tell you right away that it's not complete evidence, because I'll show you others that give you complete evidence. You know, when you say it's a 90% intercept, you mean 9 out of 10 times the air should be filled with large fireballs in this particular photograph. Now, if we go to the next slide, we can see that this slide was taken about probably 5 or 6 hundredths of a second later.
Yeah.
In other words, this is maybe if the frame rate was 30 slides per second, you would have had, this was the third slide. There's third slide.
Yeah.
So in the video, and we can see that the rockets have progressed. And since we know that the length of the rocket's about 6.5 meters, and we know that the distance, the speed of the rocket is about 800 meters per second, and the last location of this particular rocket that's been singled out in the bottom right of the designated area, we know where it was. We know it traveled about 50 meters. And since we know the speed is 800 meters per second, and it traveled 50 meters, we know that it traveled roughly two frames for 30 at 30 frames per second. So this example, I'm just trying to give you a sense of what kind of information you can derive from these slides.
Yeah.
Why don't we go to the next slide? Let's just pass over this one. All right, here is an extremely interesting slide. This is what's called a time-lapse photograph. What happens here is that, if you recall, the aperture of the camera was left open, and so my guess is maybe 15 seconds. So this aperture was just open for 15 seconds. So for 10 or 12 seconds, there was an Iron Dome interceptor in powered flight. So if we were looking at it in real time, we would just see a slightly elongated plume.
Yeah.
But since the aperture is open, the plume trails out an image of its own trajectory. So we have a detailed trajectory of the actual Iron Dome. Now, notice that the fireball is much smaller in the case of the Iron Dome.
A while ago,
no surprise. And notice there's a little something below the fireball. And let's go to the next slide and see if we got the right. Gary?
One more.
Okay, here that's right. You got exactly the right slide now. Okay, so what I've done is put a little box around the area of interest, and I've magnified it a very large amount. And notice that the fireball is acting like a flash bulb. You probably wouldn't see this rocket from this kind of time-lapse image. Wouldn't be bright enough. But the explosion of the fireball
illuminates it.
illuminates instantaneously the rocket. So we get a nice image of the rocket. It's like in the old days, you'd have a cameraman, and the flash would go off. And that would act like an aperture, a shutter. And so we actually can see the rocket. So in this particular case, we can actually see the miss. And we can also see that if this rocket was on exactly the trajectory it's on, but arrived maybe 1/100th of a second earlier, the rocket that's below the trajectory would be above the trajectory, and it might have had a chance of hitting the front end. So there's an example of what happens when you don't come front on.
And so, maybe too technical of a question to ask.
Yeah.
What is the technology behind the interceptor so it knows when to detonate? Because
that's the question. Is it working? Let's go to the next slide. The next slide shows a dashed line that's put in by me, showing you the trajectory that the Iron Dome interceptor should have been following. In other words, notice that it overshoots the actual trajectory. So something is wrong with the homing on the system. Now,
fascinating.
I don't know what is wrong with the homing. I want to be clear here. What I can tell you is the homing is screwed up. And it may be because the tracking of the rocket is not as accurate as people hoped it would be. It may be that the rocket was wobbling a bit and they expected it to land, to be on a different trajectory. There's something drastically wrong with the ability of the Iron Dome system to home on the target properly. And we'll see this evidence of this in a whole bunch of other images that we'll be looking at. And anytime when you look at an image where the contrail of the Iron Dome in the day, like during the day, is coming perpendicular to the actual object, to the actual target, you know that there was no chance of an intercept, because the timing would have to be perfect, and perfect timing in real life almost never occurs. Maybe 1 in 1,000. But any intercept we see that is actually successful is almost certainly going to be because it was on the right forward trajectory. A side trajectory can almost never produce an intercept. Why don't we go to the next slide? Here's an example of Iron Dome interceptors being fired in a time-lapse photo. And you see all of them are bending over. So if there's a rocket that they're trying to hit, they would have to be trying to hit it from the side on. No way any of these warheads all of these Iron Dome interceptors were sent on the wrong trajectory. They had no chance at all of hitting anything.
And so, do I understand from this picture correctly, Professor, that if there had been any intercepts, there would be some big bright balls, like you said before? You
would see a bright ball, but the intercept would have to hit the warhead.
But which means that none of these missiles hit anything.
They hit nothing. What you're seeing is the explosion of the warheads at some point in their flight trajectory. If we look at the next slide, and you look to the left, you can see some of the Iron Dome explosions in the slide. You can see little confetti like light, little trails of light almost like confetti surrounding the fire. Not all of them, some of the fireballs. Those cases show you detonations of Iron Dome interceptors before they finished using all the propellant in the Iron Dome interceptor. So there was still in powered flight. There was still propellant left in the rocket motor casing. And when the Iron Dome detonated, the fragments of the burning rocket motor propellant were just lit up so you can see them and falling toward the ground. None of these things show any intercept at all.
Wow. That is
So
amazing.
Just nothing.
And so Ted, here in the last few minutes we have here, I mean, the consequence of this is profound to me, because while we talked about at the beginning, marketing is great for the public because they just tell them it hit and that's all they have to do. And they can just claim, oh yeah, those are all hits, even though you just showed how they weren't.
Right. They're misses.
But for an adversary, they're not fooled by this. I'm sure they've got their own.
Of course they
do all these same things. So if it comes to, if Iran, and let me ask this as a question, not a statement, if Iran got into a war with Israel and they weren't trying to get drones shot down because they didn't want to just send a message, but they actually wanted to hit something, could they, with some of their better missiles, strike more pinpoint targets? Because I think you showed me how.
Well, if they fired their ballistic missiles, let's say at Tel Aviv instead of this airfield, I pointed out that the rockets were breaking up, but there were little dots in the field of view that were almost certainly warheads that broke off the missiles that had broken up and that they were heading toward the ground. Now, if there was a city below, there would be damage from those warheads. If it's an airfield, the warheads fall a kilometer outside the airfield perimeter. But if it's a city and the warheads fall a kilometer short of the aim point, so what? They do as much damage as you can hope to do, given that you don't have a super precise high precision weapon that you're using. You're not firing a Hellfire into the window of an adversary's meeting place. You're firing a warhead in the general direction of your adversary, and the warhead may land within a half a kilometer. This is a good. Hold that slide, please. The warhead will fall within a half a kilometer of the intended target, but it doesn't matter because it hits a building or it lands in an open space or whatever. So if you want to do general damage and terrorize a city, it's good enough. So you won't be able to defend a city with Iron Dome against that kind of attack because it won't work. The Iron Dome system won't work. Now, here is a good slide. It shows damage to an artillery rocket produced by an Iron Dome warhead fragment. The Iron Dome was passing, the front of this rocket is to the right. The Iron Dome interceptor missed the front end of this rocket. So this rocket hit the ground and the warhead exploded. But the warhead in the Iron Dome exploded late before, there was a delay in time. It probably should have exploded a few, maybe 10 or 20 milliseconds early, thousands of seconds sooner if it was going to hit the warhead. But instead, it was a few tens of milliseconds too late. And it flew by it, and it did significant damage to the casing. The missile was not intercepted, though, in the sense that we are, because the warhead was not stopped, and it went onto the ground and did damage in the designated defended area that we were concerned about. Let's go to the next slide and see what. This is another good slide. You'll see this is the back end of a rocket and you can see there's a hole punched right in that rocket. And that's from a fragment of an Iron Dome interceptor. But this rocket also went to the ground and exploded. I'll end here because I don't know all the other slides. I screwed up. It's not Gary's fault, even though we'd like to blame him. But
I'll take it anytime, Ted.
Okay, all right. But that should give your audience a sense. I can, if it's of interest, it's up to you. I can send you the proper briefing, where I got it all right, and you can then redistribute it to your audience members who ask for it. I don't know if that's of interest. I send you a PDF file.
Okay.
Would you like to do that, or should your audience just ask me directly?
Yeah, sure. If you don't mind giving out your contact information.
Yeah, sure. It's not. It's public. It's a public document. I'm a scholar. My job is to provide information to the public.
Well, we sure appreciate it.
I'm science, technology, and national security. That's what I'm paid to teach. That, not to make up nonsense.
And so, how could they contact you if they wanted to?
You can just send me an email. Just put in. Just say, please send briefing slides as a heading, and send it to Postol, Postol. That's the only mistake you can make. It's OL, not AL. Postal at MIT.edu. Please, no jokes about going postal.
I imagine you've heard them all. Hey, one last thing before I let you go here, because I noticed in the thread here that lots of people were asking about how would you compare the Iron Dome system to the Russian S-300 or S-400 system? Is it more effective or is it less effective?
Well, the important question to always ask is, what is the target? In other words, if I'm trying to shoot down an airplane, Patriot is a very effective interceptor. If I'm trying to shoot down a ballistic missile, it's a waste of $4 million. So the target is, the target you're trying to hit is very important. It appears, well, the S-400 is extremely, S-300, 400, and 500 are extremely capable against airplanes at very long ranges. So,
and does that include the F-16?
Oh yeah. I think the F-16s are going to be in deep trouble. What the Russians have done, the Russians have done something very clever that we have not done. The Russians, of course, have designed their ground-based air defense systems to do more things than we have designed our air defense systems for, because a lot of our military planning is based on the assumption we have control of the air over military operations. The Russians did not always assume that for their military planning. So they have their equivalent of an airborne warning and control system is they have a large airplane. I believe it's an Antonov airframe, and it has a radar on it that surveys at long range. Now, because it operates at maybe 35 or 40,000 feet altitude, it can see out to a long range, a couple of 100 miles, because the curvature of the Earth does not limit it. The S-300 or 400 on the ground below it cannot see at that range, cannot see an airplane at that range, even though the airplane may be at 10 kilometers or 30,000 feet altitude. So what the Russians have implemented is important. It's one thing to have a principle. What they have implemented is a system where they can communicate directly to the ground, the S-300 or 400 on the ground, and tell it where to shoot over the horizon, where beyond its visibility it can shoot. And it has these very large interceptors. I think they're the 13,000-pound interceptors. They're real. They call it the giant interceptor.
Mm.
and it can reach hundreds of kilometers range. It can reach 300, 400 kilometers range. So this thing is then fired, and it follows a ballistic trajectory, roughly speaking. And as it falls from its apogee back into the atmosphere, it's gaining speed. Loses speed as it gets to high altitude, and then it
Yeah.
gains speed. And you're in your F-16 and you're tooling around, and there's nothing happening, right? You have what's called the electronic support measure, a receiver. It's sometimes referred to as an ESM receiver. It tells you somebody is looking at you with a radar. It detects the radar signal, but there's no radar on you at that time because the Antonov has gone somewhere else. It's looking somewhere else. So you're just tooling along and you're happy, not under attack. And then within 1 or 2 seconds before you're hit, this missile arrives at your projected location, which the Antonov has told it where to be, and it turns on a very powerful radar on the interceptor,
Oh, wow.
which is not designed to deceive you. It's saying, I'm here, it's too late. And so even if you detect this missile coming in, it's coming in at a fantastic speed, and it destroys you. And the Russians were shooting down Ukrainian aircraft like crazy earlier in the war before they had completely destroyed the Ukrainian Air Force. And that's what they're going to do to the F-16s. They're going to be gone.
Well, listen, I already see what we need to have you back for on the next episode to explain some of this stuff here, because that is really fascinating. And we're going to definitely have you back. But listen, thank you so much for this one here, because, again, you've shown such clarity on what the real situation is. And anytime we get the truth, that's something we like to promote. And so thank you for coming on and telling us that.
Well,
today.
thank you very much. It's my pleasure. This is what I'm paid to do.
All right. Well, we appreciate it.
I'm not paid to give you stories like someone on, but
yeah. There's plenty of those guys. We showed some of them earlier.
yeah, we're plenty of those.
Yeah,
you can find them easily.
Yeah, exactly. But we found this gem here, so we're going to keep coming back to you. Thanks so much, Professor, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you, and thank you, Gary, too.
Yeah, always on it. And we thank you guys for coming in and watching us today. Again, this is such a great one. We got John Mearsheimer coming up here shortly, less than an hour from now, 3:00 Eastern time, where he's going to talk about, is the Zelensky and the West detached from reality based on some of the things you're saying? I think you probably already know the answer to this, but you definitely want to hear Professor Mearsheimer tell you why. We'll see you then, and be sure to like and subscribe, and we will be on here shortly to see you. So talk to you soon.